All right, I've started the attendance. Please sign in. Okay, please sign to the attendance. We'll start in a moment. Okay, we have just about everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Any questions before we get started? No? All right. Let's do some review questions. Let's see how you do with these. Okay, and also everyone, please, last name, comma first. Rename yourselves. All right. So here's your first question. It's going to be a short answer. Let's let you write a little bit. Why did Congress lack the power to enact the individual mandate under its Commerce Clause powers? Why did Congress... Oh, I'm sorry, I ended it by accident. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. I'm sorry. I meant to click the one button, hit the stop button. So try it again. Why did Congress lack the power to enact the individual mandate under its commerce powers? That's your first question. Okay. Another 20 seconds or so. All right. All right. I'm going to stop it there. Yeah, just about everyone. All right. Who's next?
I think I'm next, Professor.
Okay. Thank you, Scylla. All right. So walk me through the steps, right? I know you wrote an answer. We'll get to your answer in a minute. But what are the steps that we have to do to determine whether Congress has the power to enact law? What are the things we have to think about?
So, if it's going through the steps, you have to see if the activity is it's an economic activity.
Well, first off, okay, so you're in the right direction, but at the very basic level, what's the first question we have to ask ourselves, right? What is this question asking you?
If it's
what was the question?
For the Commerce Clause.
Okay, good. Okay, so what's our starting point with the Commerce Clause, right? What do we first have to ask ourselves? What's the easiest possible case that Congress can do?
That's going to be whether if intercourse among the states.
Very good. Very good. So what case is that?
Gibbons v. Ogden.
Excellent. Very good, Helen, right? Gibbons v. Ogden, right? Which asks whether there's intercourse among the states. Okay, perfect. Okay, that's step one. In this case, is the government regulating intercourse or commerce among the several states?
So they had said that the Commerce Clause did not apply because Congress did not have the power, because although they have the power to prohibit and regulate, they didn't have the authority.
You're giving me like 4 steps down the road. You're giving me exactly correct, but I want to remember, like in like middle school, you have to do math. You have to show your work. Remember that? And everyone hates showing their work. Unfortunately, you have to show your work in this class. I'm sorry. So you're first right. Gibbons is not relevant because there's no commerce among the several states. So we're not talking about interstate commerce. What are we talking about here? It's not interstate.
It's intrastate.
It's intrastate. Okay, good. Intrastate what?
It's intrastate.
Fill in the blank.
Activity?
Is it? Is it intrastate activity?
Well, it was inactivity.
Okay. Thanks, Cecilia. Very good. That was excellent. Okay. So I want you, I'll go to you a second, Deborah. I see your hands up.
I was asking if you could put it in the chat, the link in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's always linked from the syllabus folder. I'll be happy to do it, but I don't always.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I'll go ahead.
On the syllabus, there's a link to a folder of all the class notes, and you should be able to find that pretty easily. But if you remind me, I'll do it. I don't always remember. All right. So I think Hasela laid out, a very smart way of approaching these questions, right? You first start with the very beginning, Gibbons v. Ogden, right? First week of class. Is this intercourse? Is this commerce among the several states? The answer is no. Then we ask ourselves, okay, so it's intrastate. And there are these 3 things to think about, right? Intrastate economic activity, right? Intrastate economic activity. There are three things to think about there. Is this economic in nature? Yeah, it's about buying insurance, buying and selling commodities. But is a mandate to buy insurance a regulation of activity? The court says it's not. The court says that's not. It's not a regulation of activity. It's a regulation of inactivity. Now, I kind of am playing a trick on you because this isn't really Commerce Clause. This is really Necessary and Proper Clause, which is fine. They blend together. The court doesn't always separate them. But at a minimum, the test from Lopez, from Raich, about local interstate activity concerns necessary and proper. Okay, but at a minimum, I think the answer here is no, right? Congress cannot enact a mandate under its commerce powers because this is not a regulation of intrastate economic activity. It's economic, it's not activity. Okay, question to number 1. Okay, thank you for that, Hisela. Let's do number 2. Okay, so number 2, again, I want to do short answer for you all. I think I like you practicing your typing answer that helps you think it's a little bit more preparative for your exam. Why did Congress lack the power to enact the individual mandate under the Necessary and Proper Clause powers? Why did Congress lack the power to enact the individual mandate under its Necessary and Proper Clause powers? Okay, another 20 seconds. And Deborah, I just pasted the link from the syllabus for the class notes folder. You can just click that to start each class.
Perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, another 10 seconds. And, oh, we're at the very start of the class. Okay, Rachel, then. Rachel, you're up in about 5 seconds. That makes it easier at the top of the list. All right, Rachel, what's your... Actually, I'll get to your answer in a minute, Rachel. But let's try and walk through this one step at a time. Where do you start, Rachel, when I ask you about necessary and proper clause? What's your starting point to think about?
Well, I guess, typically with the necessary and proper clause, don't you also have to have like an enumerated clause in which it relates to?
Okay.
And then in
So
this case,
what would that enumerated power be?
well, here they were trying to say it was the commerce clause, but then it ended up being the taxing power.
Forget taxing power. Forget that for a minute. That comes later. The taxing power comes after the necessary and proper clause in the chief's opinion. He first does commerce, then does necessary and proper, and then he does taxing. But we'll forget taxing for now. But so let's start with necessary and proper. Where does your analysis begin?
Well, I guess with the, I don't know, they separated necessary and proper.
You're like 3 steps ahead. You're doing exactly the right thing. We're just jumping ahead. Where do you begin, though? If I ask, does Congress have the power to do X under its necessary and proper clause power? What's the first thing we should think about? I think you said it a minute ago.
Well, I don't know if this is too far back, but going to McCulloch and like defining necessary.
You can do that, sure. Right?
Okay.
But let's just fill this in. You said before it has to relate to some other enumerated power.
Yes.
Which in this case would be the commerce clause, right?
Yes.
But what did we just say a minute ago? Can Congress enact this law under its commerce powers?
No.
No. All right, good. So now, because we can't rely on the commerce clause, we can't rely on Darby, we can't rely on Wickard, we can't rely on on all these New Deal cases. Where do we go back to? What case we start with?
Well, the necessary with McCulloch.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. We go back to McCulloch, right? And how did McCulloch understand the phrase necessary?
Convenient. There's a list. Convenient.
Yeah. Good.
I know there was a bigger one. I can't remember exactly.
Everyone always remembers convenient. It's funny.
Yeah.
Useful.
Useful.
Right. Oh yeah, not necessarily. I think it's convenient, useful, and then there are others. I don't have to remember all of that. That's fine, right? In the Obamacare case, in NFIB, did the Chief Justice think that the mandate was a useful means of regulating the healthcare market?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one. Check. What about the second element of that phrase?
That's how they found it did not comply under the necessary and proper clause because it wasn't proper.
Okay, that's very good. Why was the mandate to buy insurance not proper?
I think because they decided it would expand the power too far and it would make it too broad.
Make what too broad? Just this is not a criticism of you, but in general, try not to use pronouns. It, they, because it's not always clear what you're talking about. Just in general for everyone. So what was being expanded too far?
The power of the federal government.
Good. What happens when the federal government's powers are expanded too far? What's the consequence of that decision?
They infringe upon the state's power.
There it is. And not just the states, also
the individual.
Bingo. Very good. Thank you so much, Rachel. So the Chief Justice in NFIB said that the mandate may be necessary to regulate the health insurance marketplace, but it's not a proper means because it intrudes upon the sovereignty of the individuals. That it's unprecedented, that's never been done before, that there's no history of Congress enacting such a law in the past. This analysis was frankly, how to put it, not entirely satisfying. It kind of left a lot to be desired. The chief really didn't spell out with any sort of precision what renders a law improper. But I think it was significant in that he actually suggested these were two separate elements with clarity. And he did that very, very well. And he said that, whenever you have any sort of case, it's not enough to just stop with McCulloch and go home, right? You can't say, this is convenient and you're done. There's two separate elements that have to be considered, which is necessary and proper. All right, there's your Obamacare review. I'll take a look at all of your answers later to see if you're all on the right track, but just by skimming, I think you're more or less in the ballpark. Yeah, the downside for these short answers, I can't review them quickly. It takes me a few minutes after class to sort of scroll through all that. Oh, by the way, I know the iPhone has an issue where you can't see what you're typing with the keyboard on the app. I'm aware of it. I think it's a bug in the software. I don't have an answer for you. You can use the browser version if you prefer to type with a keyboard, but your call. All right, questions on Obamacare? All right, let's try question number 3 on the chat. All right, so the question is this: who or what? Oh, I'm sorry, the short answer. I apologize. Ignore that one. Who or what can the federal government require to take actions? A, state legislature. B, state executive branch official. C, an individual. D, all the above. E, none of the above. People love the none of the above option. All the above, they hate those options. All right, take a look at that. Alyssa, I'll call you in about 5 seconds. Ooh, this is close. This is really close. Wow. All right, I'm going to stop it in 2 seconds. Get your answers in. All right. Alyssa, help us out here. What'd you put here, Alyssa?
I kind of went back and forth between the none of the above or C, but
Yeah.
I ended up picking C, an individual.
Okay.
I guess I was kind of thinking.
Well, let's go one step at a time. What about A?
No, you can't. That, I guess, would infringe on like the police powers.
What case tells us that the answer is not A?
The one, New York.
Good. New York. Very good. Okay. What about B? What case? What about B? Is B true?
No, Printz.
Printz. Okay. So A and B are out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the answer cannot be A because A is New York versus the United States. The answer cannot be B because of Printz. Now we get to C, Alyssa. Think out loud. Just tell me what you're thinking. Because I think you're. This, by the way, is close. It's like 40-50. It's pretty close. What's going through your head with letter C, the individual?
What went through my head was that they can enact. Congress can enact.
Good.
Rules that abide by the Constitution. Therefore, the Constitution is like all encompassing for the people. Therefore, all individuals have to follow it.
Well, Alyssa, can Congress require you to take actions?
No, and that's what tripped me up.
What case is giving you difficulty?
Actions, but
What case is giving you difficulty? What case is affecting letter C?
is it New York from today?
No, it's not New York. Individuals.
Or I guess was it the NFIB?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'll call on Joseph in a minute. But I think the struggle that Alyssa's having is probably what most people have, which is why I crafted the question somewhat precisely. Joseph, you there?
Yes.
All right, Joseph, let me ask you this question, please. Can the federal government require individuals to take actions?
No.
Tell me why.
Remember we talked about the last class, the face mask mandate kind of deal, and how that would have to be up to the states and not the federal government.
That's a good example. Are there any actions the federal government can make you take?
No.
You ever get a paycheck?
Okay, yeah, pay taxes.
Yeah.
They can incentivize you.
Yeah, when you look at your paycheck for the first time, it's like, what the heck? Yeah, they can tax you. They can make you pay taxes. Joseph, do you remember what happened when you turned 18? You have to file some paperwork with the government?
The military draft?
The selective service, the draft.
Yeah.
That sure as hell is something they make you do. I mean, thankfully that hasn't happened in some time. You ever get jury duty?
Nope.
Okay, well, I've been called a couple times. I've never been selected for a jury. This was actually funny. A couple years ago, I was called. It was actually a fairly high-profile case. It was Harris County, where an off-duty Houston police officer basically beat this guy up with a metal pipe or something. And the prosecutor, who was actually an alum of this law school, went after the cop. Because it's rare, she actually charged the off-duty cop, and there was a jury selection, and I was there all day, and we finally got to what's called, mostly it's voir dire, but in Texas it's voir dire. Voir dire, usually it's voir dire, but in Texas, voir dire. The lawyer was like, Professor Blackman, can you answer some questions? I was like, oh, crap. And he's like, what does the Fifth Amendment protect? I'm like, a lot of things, which is not the answer he's looking for. He's looking for self-incrimination. I'm like, it's like due process? I don't know. And like he was asking all these questions. I'm like, this is not good. I don't want to have to educate the jury. This is not my job. So I got bounced very quickly. I'm sure the prosecutor struck me in 3 seconds, which was a smart move. But yeah, jury duty. There's federal jury duty. There's federal taxes you have to pay. There's a federal draft as well. By the way, are women eligible for selective service? That's an issue being litigated now. There was actually a district court in Houston, I think his name was Judge Miller, who held that it's unconstitutional to exclude women from the draft. That's sex discrimination. This case was actually brought by these men who are very much opposed to women being exempt from the draft, and they say it's unfair. The Fifth Circuit, though, reversed because there was a Supreme Court precedent from the 80s holding that women did not have to go to the draft. I don't know if that decision hands up. I think there actually may be a reversal on that in the future. So maybe one will have to register. Well, we'll see. All right. So the answer here, I think, is C. I get why a lot of you put E and why a lot of you struggled. I think it's a good question to struggle on. But the government can make individuals take action. They do so all the time. One of the reasons why the Obamacare case was so controversial was because the court said that you can't make people buy a product, which was a novel holding. But A and B are definitely wrong. In New York versus the United States, the court held that you can't make the state legislature do stuff, and you can't make a state executive branch official do stuff. Now, Jack, you here? I don't see Jack's name. Lady, you here?
Good morning, yes, sir.
Good morning. I like that. Good morning. Thank you. So, Lady, let me ask you a question. What do state legislatures do? I know this is a really stupid question, but it's important. What is it that the state legislature does?
They create the laws for the state.
Okay, they enact laws, right? That's what they do. And what do state executive branch officials do?
They enforce those laws.
Okay, very good. I know that sounds really dumb and obvious, but these are important questions. What would it mean for Congress to require legislature to take action? What would that actually mean practically? What would Congress be telling the legislature to do? What's the only thing they can do?
They'd be infringing on the state.
No, I know, but if Congress, let's assume an alternate world where Justice Stevens was right, okay, where Scalia is wrong. If Congress orders the state legislature to do some action, what exactly would Congress be ordering? What's the only thing legislatures can do?
Enforce the law.
No, legislature, state legislatures.
Create the laws.
What would it mean, Lainey? I think we're closer. For Congress to force the legislature to pass a law, what would that actually require? It's just
forcing them to pass a law.
Yeah. Because you said, what's the only thing legislatures can do? What's their only action?
They create the laws.
Right, so what would it mean for Congress to force a legislator to pass a law? What does it actually mean?
They're taking control of the state legislature.
And they're telling people how to vote, right?
Yes.
What if a member of the state legislature votes against a bill?
It's anarchy, I suppose.
And generally in most states, how does a bill become a law? The legislature passes it, and then what happens?
The governor has to approve it.
Right. What if the governor vetoes it?
Then the governor is contradicting the instructions from Congress.
Okay, good. Very good. Thank you, Lainey. I give this example to illustrate why I think New York has to be correct. Right? Just stop and think for a minute. Let's just assume Justice Stevens is correct in an alternate world. Right? By the way, he died in the past year. He was in his late 90s. He lived a fairly remarkable life. He was very famously a boy growing up in Chicago who was at the baseball game where Babe Ruth called the home run. He claimed he saw it. Who knows if it's true, but he claims he saw it. But let's say Stevens is right for a minute. If Congress could order a legislature to pass laws, that means that the members would have to approve the bill. They have no choice. And that means that the governor would have to sign the bill. He has no choice to veto it. That's a remarkable and stunning assertion of power that simply had never been done before. So New York wasn't nearly as controversial. The second case, Printz, proved a lot more controversial. Colin, you here?
Yes.
Colin, what would it mean for Congress? Let's just say again, Stevens is correct. What would it mean for Congress to be able to commandeer like a sheriff, for example, or a state police officer?
Would that be invading on the state's police power?
Well, it would, but what would that mean practically? If I'm a sheriff in a small town in Montana, and Congress is ordering me to run background checks on gun purchases, what does that mean practically?
It means the states don't really have any power besides the federal government.
Well, let me ask the question more precisely. If I'm a sheriff and there's something that I want to do for my local community, and I have this federal mandate saying I'll do something else, how do I resolve that dispute?
Would you be able to take that up with the state legislature? Sorry.
Can the state legislature say no to the feds under the Justice Stevens' world?
No, they couldn't.
Right. So again, if I'm a sheriff in a small town in Montana and I want to spend my time investigating a murder or something, but the federal government says, no, you need to do this background check within a certain number of days, what's the answer?
The state wouldn't be able to do that.
What's that?
The background check.
No. You're finding the hypo. If Justice Stevens is correct and commandeering is permissible, what does the sheriff do? He wants to investigate a local murder, but Congress says you must do this background check within 3 days. What does the sheriff have to do if Stevens is correct?
I'm guessing that he would have to do the background check.
Why are you guessing? This is not about guessing.
I mean, he would have to do the background check.
Why? In a conflict between state and federal laws, which prevails?
State. Federal, excuse me, sorry.
Okay,
federal.
Better. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, good. So again, consider the hypothetical. Let's say Justice Stevens is correct. Just as a practical matter. The sheriff wants to investigate a murder, but Congress says, no, you need to run these background checks. If Justice Stevens was correct, then the priorities would be reversed, that the state would have to follow whatever the feds say first, would have to expend their resources on whatever the feds say, and do the federal task first. Again, that sort of order would be quite novel. We can go into specifically how novel it would be. The burden, though, on the executive official is not as great as on the state legislature. I can concede that. For the state legislatures, they would have to actually pass a statute, and the governor would have to sign into law. That's a very significant action that's to be taken. But for the sheriffs, it's, you run a background check, you're done in a few minutes, right? It's not a huge exertion of power. But there's still an intrusion nonetheless. So that's the world that would happen if Justice Stevens was right. We don't live in that world. Okay. Questions so far? All right. Let's try question number 4. You guys thinking about New York. This will be a short answer. Which provision of the Constitution did Congress rely on in New York versus United States to enact the take title provision? The blank clause. I don't just fill in what the blank is. I don't need the clause. And I think call on Raymond in about 15 seconds. Go ahead. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, Raymond, what's your answer here?
I said necessary and proper.
Okay, tell me why.
Well, when you look to Article 1, Section 8, there's nothing that expressly states that Congress can do this, right? So then I guess you would have to look to something outside the first 12 enumerated powers. So I just automatically go to the 13th clause because, well, this in this case it was the nuclear waste, correct?
Right.
So it was purely local activity. It was
there. It is
inside the state. So you have to look to the necessary and proper clause because there's no interstate action going on there.
Okay, I think we're on the right track. Okay, the answer here is necessary and proper. People put N and P and different spellings of it, which are all fine. Someone put supremacy, which is not entirely wrong. I don't think it's the best answer, but it's not entirely right either. But the answer is necessary and proper. Let's start. Actually, you know what, Raymond? Do you want to give me the facts in New York, please, while I have you here?
Sure. Want isn't the word for it, but so.
Want? Okay. I'm sorry. Would you like to? Would you mind? How about that? Is that better?
I wouldn't mind.
Okay, I got it.
So
that should be fair.
Congress made an act that pretty much said that every state had to create a program by, was it 1990 or something along those lines, that they had to dispose of their own nuclear waste that they produced inside their state.
Yeah, just by the way, this is not like a nuclear waste. It's
radioactive.
Well, low-level radioactive waste. So this is like, if you have like a glow-in-the-dark watch, right? That's what this is. It's very low-level stuff. It's not going to kill you. There's not going to be like, from the Simpsons, three-eyed fish, but it's not good stuff. Now, Raymond, just take a step back. Why do you think states were not so keen on building sites to dispose of this stuff?
Well, it's land that you have to first purchase and buy that pretty much just sits there and is kind of not useful for anything. It's going to be input. I would imagine.
Well, not just not useful. You're taking property now, I know. Why do you think it would be hard to build these developments?
Why would it be hard to build the development?
Why would it hard to build? Lainey's raising her hand. I'll get to her in a second. Why do you think it's hard to build these facilities to dispose of this waste? Lainey, you want to help us out?
Nobody wants that in their backyard.
NIMBY.
Everybody wants it, but not in their location.
Do you guys know this expression? I know Lainey's real estate background. NIMBY. Not in my backyard, which means build it anywhere except for where I live. People do not want radioactive waste dumps in their backyard, right? So where is this? Thank you, Lainey. So where is this going to be built? Nowhere, because no one wants it in their backyard. As a result, only a handful of states actually had facilities to dispose of this. And Congress said, okay, we have a problem, right? If we get to the 1990s, I think it was 1992, and we don't have facilities to dump this stuff, we're going to have a crisis, right? We cannot have all these companies nationwide producing this waste if they're not places to dump it, right? So, oh, I think I skipped Jessica. I'm sorry, Jessica, I skipped you. You here, Jessica?
I'm here.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to skip you. I'm sure you're devastated. Jessica, what were the measures, or what were the 3 proposals that Congress came up with to try to address this problem?
They said, well, the first incentive was a monetary incentive.
Okay, good. What does that mean, monetary incentive?
That government would, I think it was that they would give them money to the states that did this. That
good. What's this? Just be precise. Who is getting the money?
The states.
Which states?
The ones. I think it was the ones that had the facilities. That
Good. Right. So the first one was monetary, right? States that had these dumps, these facilities, were given money. Is there any problem with charging states to dump in another state? Is there any constitutional problem with that, Jessica?
The court said no.
No, okay, that's fine. Okay, good. What was the second policy they enacted in the statute?
The second one was that the states, if they weren't in a pact with those states that had the facility, they could be denied access to dumping there.
Oh man, that's a big deal. So if you're Texas and you can't make an agreement with another state, then you can't dump it anywhere. That's a big deal, right? Is there any constitutional problem with telling a state you can't dump in another state?
Again, the court said no.
No, that's fine, right? There's no, constitutional right to dump your waste. Okay, Jessica, now the third one was the biggie. What was the third incentive we have?
It was that the state had to take responsibility. It was called the take title provision.
Very good. Yeah.
Where they take responsibility and they take liability.
Okay, very good.
Radioactive waste.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. Okay, so the case really turns on incentive number 3, what's called the take title provision. You'll learn this phrase in property class, if you haven't already, called title. Title basically means ownership. Under this regime, the states were required to take ownership of waste generated in their state. Now, this was not waste the state generates, right? The states weren't creating this waste. Let's say there's a factory in upstate New York that's generating this waste, right? Generally, when you generate waste in the state of New York passes laws of how to dispose of it, how to properly process it, right? You can't just dump it in the river, right? You have to follow state law of how to dispose of this waste. But New York didn't have a law about where you had to dump this waste because they didn't have a dump. They simply said ship it to some other state. But the take title regime, the take title provision was different. It said if a state does not reach an agreement with one of these other compacts, the state must take ownership of waste generated by private parties. And the state is liable for damages incurred by the failure to handle the waste properly. That's a really big deal. Because let's say there's a factory that doesn't properly manage the waste and it spills and it dumps into a river. The state is liable for damages. Not the company, the state. This was a huge deal. Laura, are you here?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
So Laura, thank you. Good morning to you too. So Laura, let me ask you this question. Logistically, what would have to happen for New York to comply with this federal law? What would New York have to do?
Build a radioactive waste disposal center.
Well, they don't have to build it themselves. What do they actually have to do?
Oh, then get an agreement with the other states that have them.
Right. So either A, they can get into an agreement. Laura, but what happens if they can't make an agreement? What if the other states like, nah, screw you, New York, we don't like you. Right? Who likes New York? Right? We don't like New York. We don't want to deal with you. What if the state cannot reach an agreement with the other compacts?
then they would have to take title of it.
And how could a state do this? Can a state just say, okay, we're going to start taking title? What do states do when they have legal responsibilities? How does that usually work in a state? What does the state actually have to do? This is my question to Lainey a couple minutes ago.
How they take possession of it?
Well, I understand they have to actually transport barrels of waste, but what authorizes state officials to do that? What would have to happen first? How does state government work? Can the state just do something on its own?
They would have to come up with their own regulations.
Yes, they would have to enact
their own laws.
That's it. Thank you, Laura. Perfect.
Sorry, I was not hearing you.
No, that's okay though. You got it. It just takes its own time. That's fine. They would have to enact laws. So a state would either have to enter into one of these compacts, but there's no guarantee they're admitted. Maybe the other states don't like New York for whatever reason. They're not obligated to welcome the New York waste. Maybe New York creates so much waste that's not safe to transport it. Right? Maybe it's just a really dangerous situation. So New York can either enter the compact. That's option one, or option two. Option two is that New York would have to take title of the waste, but they can't just say, okay, we're taking title. New York would have to enact laws. They would have to erect a regulatory regime. They would have to put regulations in place for transferring the waste. They'd have to create maybe a monetary fund to pay for the damages, right? They'd have to have insurance. They'd have to do a lot of stuff. They have to pass laws, pass regulations, buy insurance policies. So this provision, which seems like it's giving states a choice, is actually giving them a very, not so much of a choice. They can either make a compact or erect this entire elaborate regime. Can they do this? Well, let's be clear here. This law is not a regulation of interstate commerce, right? Quite literally, it's about keeping waste in your own state, right? It's not about interstate commerce. You have to rely here on the necessary and proper clause, which was our quiz question from a moment ago. Does the necessary and proper clause allow this Congress to do this, right? Can Congress force a state to take title of their waste? Okay. Alejandro, you here? Alejandro? Virginia, you here? Okay. Cassidy, you here?
I'm here.
Okay, Alejandro says your mic is not working. All right, Alejandro, tell you what, if your mic's not working, call the telephone number of the syllabus and just let me know when you're back, and I'll call you in a few minutes, okay? Yeah, it's on the syllabus, and you can just dial the number, and then that way. Yeah, if you ever get knocked off, just call the phone number. In my class last week, I got knocked off Zoom. I almost dialed in by phone, but I was able to get back in. All right, Cassidy, so let me ask this question, Cassidy. Walk me through the court's analysis here, right? How does the court assess the constitutionality of the take title provision?
First, they say that they have to figure out whether or not it is. They can either go the necessary and proper route, a la McCulloch, or they can do the 10th Amendment.
Well, hold on.
They have to figure out which one to do.
Hold on, Cassidy. I think you're hinting at something that's not here. Justice O'Connor wrote the majority opinion, right?
Yes.
Does she mention the necessary and proper clause? Does she discuss it at all?
No.
Does she mention or discuss McCulloch versus Maryland?
No.
But didn't we just say 5 minutes ago, and I told you all the answer here is necessary and proper?
Yes.
What's going on here, Cassidy? Is Justice O'Connor just wrong? Did she just screw up? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, those things are implicit.
oh my goodness, implicit. What's going on here?
Do you want me to tell you what it means for something to be implicit?
Okay, tell me. And I see that Virginia and Alejandra are here, so I'll call you guys in a minute when Cassidy's done. What does implicit mean?
Implicit, it's something is said without actually being said.
Okay, so
it's like the thing is.
Okay, so Cassidy, you're saying that O'Connor relied on the necessary and proper clause, didn't actually tell us she was doing it. She was just sort of hinted at it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Alejandra, can you try it now? Alejandra, you here? Oh, I think you're still on mute, Alejandra.
Okay, can you hear this now?
Yes. Okay, now we're in business. Very good. Okay, very good. So yeah, go ahead and answer the question. Thank you.
So the justice basically went over 3 steps that they had to do.
Oh, you're giving me correct stuff. But let's just focus on this question. Does O'Connor mention the necessary and proper clause or discuss it really any length?
She says that it doesn't apply directly, right?
Doesn't apply directly. So what relevance does it have?
Well, she said it was basically a tautology.
Okay. Your Cassidy is bouncing up and down now. What the heck is a tautology, Alejandra? This is a funny word, tautology. My goodness, what's that word mean? Tautology.
I think it's just something that you can like it teaches you something. No?
Not exactly. Well, first off, what did you say was a tautology?
It means title or ownership. No?
No. Cassidy, you were bouncing. Do you want to come back to you on this one?
She was saying that, I'm sorry. She was saying that the Constitution doesn't give Congress the power to do this, and that's kind of, since it doesn't give and nor does it take away. But she doesn't actually say anything directly about the necessary and proper, and doesn't say anything directly about the 10th Amendment.
So
that's what it is.
So what the heck was the basis of this opinion, Cassidy? She doesn't really talk about necessary and proper.
The Constitution was the basis of the opinion. Just
Okay.
the Constitution.
Okay.
The whole thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Cassidy. Okay. So this is the frustration. This is the frustration with this case, right? At a basic level, everyone agrees. Not everyone agrees, but most people agree this is probably the right decision, right? That Congress can't make New York enact a statute. That's something that it can't be done. But why? Right? I always ask you, why is this law unconstitutional? You have to give me some text. You have to give me something. And unfortunately, Justice O'Connor's opinion here is not very good. And I don't mean that as a slight of her. She just doesn't explain her thinking. She didn't show her work, right? I was yelling at, who was I yelling at earlier? Alyssa or someone else was saying, you have to show your work, you have to show your work. She didn't show her work, or it was Rachel. You didn't show your work. You have to show your work. O'Connor does not show her work. So first off, O'Connor doesn't discuss a necessary and proper clause. That is the only possible basis. She says, well, it's not commerce. Then what is it? Well, it's got to be necessary and proper. So this point would not become clear until Printz, our next case, which was studied in a few moments. But at the most basic level, O'Connor says, at the basic level, this law could be based on the necessary and proper clause. But it's not constitutional. So let's try Virginia. Can you hear us now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I appreciate you were able to get back in. Virginia, let me ask you this question, please. With McCulloch v. Maryland, right?
Yes.
What are the things we have to think about whether a law is valid in the necessary and proper clause? What are the questions we have to ask ourselves?
We have to think about the ends justifying the means, the ends
that's
means
good.
scrutiny.
Yeah, means and scrutiny, that's good. And what are the two components of necessary and proper? What do we used to think about?
What is necessary and what is proper. So we have to balance what is necessary is what Congress trying to do necessary, helpful, convenient to carry out, to effectuate an enumerated power. And then we have to ask we just ask then whether or not it is proper that they do so within the scope of the Constitution. So it's a two.
Perfect answer. All right, so let's start with necessary, Virginia. Is the take title provision a convenient way to regulate the interstate waste market or the interstate waste process? Is it helpful to Congress to have this provision?
Yes.
Yeah. Why?
Because it makes the states do what Congress wants. It makes them either force them to implement a federal it forces them to implement their under their regulatory scheme.
Good. Yeah, it prevents environmental damage. I think everyone can agree that that's it's a good thing to prevent states from spilling waste into the rivers, right? Okay, but here's where the O'Connor opinion starts getting a little bit funky. What about proper, Virginia? Does O'Connor or does this seem to be a proper exercise of federal power?
No.
No. Why not? Why do you say the answer is no?
The answer is no because the expansion of Congress's power over the states in this way was to commandeer them, to take over, and that was not going to work out.
That was not what?
That was not constitutional.
Why is that bad, though? Why, in other words, what tells us that Congress can't do this? In other words, why is this not proper? This is not an easy question.
It just overbore the autonomy of state agents to.
You're giving me such a good answer. How do we know that? How do we know that that's not permissible? What tells us this is not permissible?
Is it the 10th Amendment?
Okay. I got the 10th Amendment on the chat. It's pasted there. And it says, Virginia, I'll read it to you. It says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. How does that text resolve this case? Does that text tell us anything?
Basically, it says that if this Congress can come up with a law that they want the states to follow, but it's not up to them to tell the states how they carry it out. And I think that that's what they were trying to do here, and that's why that's why it violated the Constitution.
You give me a very good answer, Virginia, and I think you're doing a much better job than Justice O'Connor did. So kudos to you, applause to you. But the opinion doesn't actually answer this question, right? Justice O'Connor says that the 10th Amendment is a truism or a tautology, right? That was the word I think someone said a few minutes ago. A truism or a tautology. What the heck does that mean? A truism or a tautology? It basically means that the 10th Amendment doesn't add anything. It merely states an obvious principle. Right? Look at the 10th Amendment. What does it actually say? Either the federal government has the power or the state has the power. Right? If the feds don't have a power, the states have it. But if the feds have the power, then the states don't have it. Right? It's like two sides of the same coin. Who has the power? The states or the feds? If the feds have the power, the state doesn't. If the feds do not have the power, the states do have it. Yeah. Cassidy said it's saying the same thing twice using different words. That's exactly right. You're repeating yourself, right? I mean, A, if the feds have the power, the states do not. B, if the feds lack the power, the states have it. You're saying the same thing, just opposite. And O'Connor says that's merely a truism. It doesn't add anything. Lainey, what do you think?
So why do we have the 10th Amendment if it doesn't add anything to the Constitution?
Such a good question. I could write a book on that question, an entire book.
That you will.
Yeah, God, Lord help me. I don't have enough books. We run out of bookshelf space, right? I think I write more books than I read. But the short answer is it's not entirely clear what the 10th Amendment adds. Some people might argue it merely provides a rule of construction. It merely makes clear that if the federal government lacks a power, that power belongs to the state. Right? Perhaps you could say, well, if the federal government doesn't have the power, then no one has it. The 10th Amendment, at a minimum, suggests that the feds lack the power, the states have it. So it does do something, right? It does perform some role. But it's kind of obvious. If the feds lack it, the states have it. Doesn't that seem obvious? But the 10th Amendment by itself doesn't do much. It recognizes the states have this authority, but doesn't really add much to it. So then let's go back to the question that we were on. Virginia, Cassidy. Michael, you here? Michael? Heather, I think I saw your name.
Hi.
Okay, Heather. So let's ask this question again. Why is this law, this take title provision, not proper? How do we know that it's not a proper law?
It's not proper because it would basically take over state legislature.
Okay, you're describing what it does, but how do we know that's not proper?
I mean, because, that's the rule, like the power that the states have.
How do you know that? Does the 10th Amendment tell us that?
Not explicitly.
Oh, God, there it is. We're back to implicit, aren't we? So Heather, you're on the right track. Just tell me a little bit more. I think you're getting closer.
Because if it's not something that Congress has the power directly to do, then it would be a power for the states, and if they take that away, then that would be a violation of the law.
Okay, I think you're close. Okay. I have you read these cases out of order, right? Last week we read the Obamacare case. Today we're reading New York versus United States, and we're reading Printz in a few moments. These cases were not decided in that order. They were decided first New York, then Printz, then Obamacare. If I was asking you this question in 1992 when New York was decided, and I ask you what the heck is the basis of the ruling, you'd be like, I don't know what O'Connor was talking about. Actually, the 10th Amendment added nothing, but this was unconstitutional because it violated the 10th Amendment. And I say, yeah, I don't know either. The 10th Amendment doesn't decide this case. In fact, Randy and I had a debate about this. The title is chapter. The chapter is titled 10th Amendment. And I wanted to change it. Randy, the 10th Amendment has nothing to do with this. And he's like, well, but that's what people know. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So we agree. We usually agree at the end. But then we get to Printz. And Scalia starts to suggest what it means to be improper. And then we get to the Obamacare decision. Roberts, I think, actually put some teeth on it. So the answer of what New York meant wasn't clear until almost 20 years later, after Justice O'Connor was long off the court. This is a strange factor of ConLaw, where the court does not always explain their thinking right away. Or they'll sort of say something, and they come back later and explain what they meant. You know, it's like when you watch a movie, there's like a trilogy, and in the first part of the trilogy, they have some obscure fact that doesn't really make any sense. And then when they get to the third movie, they finally explain what was in the first movie, right? Basically, Obamacare was Avengers Endgame, right? It clarified things that happened a decade earlier that didn't really make sense, but that's why that happened. Okay, now I get it. Cassie asks, why did they do this? Well, the optimists would say they already had this plan. They said we're going to lay this out incrementally. But the better answer is they don't know. They reached a result that wasn't fully thought out, and they figured out later a way to explain themselves. Right? It's called retconning in film, right? Where you basically explain what happened earlier based on what you learn later. Right? In 1992, the court was different. Right? Justice White was still in the court. Justice Stevens was in the court. There are a lot of justices who are not with us anymore. And different people come and go. It's a confusing aspect. So you have to understand that you have New York, Printz, and Obamacare, but the doctrine wasn't really clarified until you got to Printz and really with the Obamacare decision. I don't think O'Connor understood what Scalia was getting at. I think O'Connor just had a implicit, that's what I think you guys used, implicit recognition this was bad. And she didn't really know why. And she didn't explain why it was bad. She said, this is bad, we can't do this, it's not been done before. But there was really no textual argument for it in the New York decision. It would only become obvious some years later. I know, that confuses the heck out of you. Questions on O'Connor's majority opinion?
Professor, this is Moses.
Hey, Moses, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. So, here's where I'm struggling, and here's where I can kind of see where she's going.
Okay.
I think I'm struggling with how she's starting off, or how you wove in the necessary and proper clause in this when she doesn't. So I'm struggling with that part.
Yeah.
But it sounds like to me that she's saying it's not proper because it just simply violates federalism, this structure of government that we have. And that part to me makes more sense if I'm correct.
Well, that's right. Let me ask you this question, Moses. How do you know that something violates federalism? How do you know?
Well, here she goes to the Constitution, but of course, the Constitution doesn't quite say that this is federalism, that this whole system is federalism.
Yeah.
So perhaps, I don't want to say this, but maybe it's implied.
Implicit, yeah. That's it. It's implicit. That's what we keep saying. Yeah. Yeah. You see the difficulty, right? There's not like a federalism clause in the Constitution, right? With commerce, like, is this commerce, is it not commerce, right? But we're talking about federalism, there's no clear statement about what is and is not permissible, right? We know this feels wrong because there's no history of Congress telling states to pass laws, or we don't have this, tradition or practice. So we can make an argument based on practice, but there's nothing really in the text of the Constitution that gets us there. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it does. I mean, well,
text, right? I mean, I can make an argument based on practice, right? But what in the text of the Constitution tells us this is not proper?
Well, there's nothing in the text that says it's not proper. It's just a practice. You have these states that have their own laws, their own constitutions, their own ways of doing things.
Good.
And then you have the central government that has its own laws, its own states, and its own.
Yeah. And Lane, I see you in a second. I'll get to you in a minute. Yeah, Moses, I think you're exactly right. I think what you're trying to realize in this class is that there's some issues in which there is some textual guidance. Right? What is a tax? What is not a tax? What's commerce? What's not commerce? But when you get to a certain point where the text doesn't always give you a clear answer. And I think O'Connor relies on what you call implicit, I think that's or implied, the word that you use, Moses. And it's her sense of what the Constitution is about. It's about federalism. It's about having states' rights. And that's, I think, a valid perspective, but we have to be candid that this is not The text doesn't give us 100% answer. Yeah. I see you're struggling. I see you're struggling with it, but that's okay. You're allowed.
Well, I guess I've just taken it as I've taken federalism as if it's as if it's explicit.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing it as implicit, and that's maybe where I'm having to. It just always is. I mean,
so it's based on history, right? We've had this practice for 200 years, right? And
yes.
That's how our country is structured.
Yes.
And that's sort of, Lainey, I didn't forget about you. Isn't that sort of what Scalia argues in the next case, though? That there's no practice of doing this before?
Yes, that's what he's hitting at. That's what he's hitting at, and more clear.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Moses. Very good. Lainey, I'll come to you for a minute.
I think Justice O'Connor, maybe I'm just in the same can of worms, but she did say we have a system of dual sovereignty, right? So, I mean, she was identifying what she was talking about. She just maybe didn't get to the answer clearly enough for us.
Oh, no, she definitely said there's federalism, there's dual sovereignty, but that doesn't answer this question, right? What about having dual sovereignty means that Congress can instruct the states what to do? I mean, it's not self-evident. It's not obvious that this is the right answer.
Okay.
But do you understand that just saying federalism doesn't get you to home plate? It gets you, maybe it's a starting point, but it's not the finishing argument. Yeah, I think Moses and also Lainey are articulating, I think, a similar concern. Like, you just think this is obvious, right? This is implicit. Well, Justice Stevens doesn't think it's implicit. He was a justice of the court, and his dissent says that this is simply wrong. That our Constitution was framed to give Congress this power, right? That nothing in the Constitution says Congress lacks this power. And Stevens says in times of war, Congress could order the states to provide troops. Actually, he's probably wrong about that, but we'll just assume for a moment that he's right. Moses asked about history. What if history is not so clear? What if there's some practice of Congress ordering states what to do? Does the case come out the other way? Right, these historical-based arguments are often subject to some debate. I think Printz makes that much more clear. All right. Questions, my friends, on New York. Very important case that doesn't explain its reasoning entirely, but sort of hints at things. I think Lane's right. It says, well, there's dual sovereignty. It's sort of like just laying the groundwork, laying foundation, putting seeds in the ground, which would grow some years later. Okay. Any other questions on New York? Here we go. Daryl, you here?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
All right, thanks, Daryl. Daryl, you want to give me the facts in the next case, Printz against the United States?
Yeah, so Congress had enacted...
Hold on, I think I'm hearing an echo. Do you hear the echo?
Okay, so my mom's on a call behind me.
Oh, that's fair. All right, go on.
She's trying to work while I'm trying to...
Yeah, no, I hear you, my friend. I hear. We're all in the same boat.
Congress enacted the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which basically had the chief law enforcement officer of each state have to do background checks on everybody who was getting a handgun in the state. And then these multiple different states or different counties of Montana and Arizona, is that what it was? Basically said that this was unconstitutional.
Well, was it the states who were bringing the lawsuit? Who was actually bringing these lawsuits? Was it the states?
The CLEOs of the counties.
Yeah. What's CLEOs? The CLEOs. What are those?
The chief law enforcement officer.
Okay, good. So just in plain English, who was the guy from Montana? What was his position?
The chief law enforcement officer in the county.
What do you call a chief law enforcement officer in Montana?
The head of.
What do you call? He's got a badge with a star in it. What's his name?
Sheriff.
Sheriff. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much, and tell your mom we all appreciate you guys are working together. I know this is not easy. Yeah, he's a sheriff, and actually, he wasn't just a sheriff. He was actually also the he ran the morgue. He was the mortician of the town. This guy, if you watch the video, you see him. This guy's built like a tree. He's just huge. He looks the part. He's out of Central Casting. So you have Sheriff J. Printz of Ravalli County, Montana, and Sheriff, I think it was Richard Mack of Graham County, Arizona. I'm blanking on the county. By the way, funny story. The case is called Printz versus United States. It's not called Mack versus United States. Why? Generally, when the Supreme Court decides a case with multiple parties, they sort them not alphabetically, but based on who filed the petition for review first. And in this case, Printz filed his appeal first, therefore his name came first. So even though M, Mac, comes before P comes first. So maybe 10 years ago, I got an email out of the blue from Sheriff Mack, and he was complaining that I should call the case Mack versus United States, not Printz versus United States, because his name comes first alphabetically. Anyway, he's wrong. But anyway, these are actual people. Now, some background that might not be obvious. This was not a Second Amendment case, but it kind of was. Sheriff Printz was basically, I think he was a board member of the NRA. And the NRA more or less bankrolled this lawsuit. This was a way to challenge the federal gun control law without relying on the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the Second Amendment in this class. I teach the Second Amendment in my First Amendment class, which I'll be teaching in the spring, which you're all welcome to come if you want to suffer me for another semester. The Second Amendment, though, had not yet been given any teeth, right? The Supreme Court hadn't really interpreted it yet. That would come in 2008. So this was sort of an indirect way to challenge the gun control law. All right, so the background of the law is this. In the early 1990s, states had very different processes to purchase a handgun, to purchase other different types of guns. Some states had background checks. Some states did not have background checks. But there was really no national database to run a background check because the technology didn't exist. So what this law said is, okay, we will put together a temporary process. Until this, what's called the NICS, the National Instant Background Check. It's NICS, they call it. So until NICS is developed, we will put together a temporary program. If you want to buy a gun anywhere in the United States through a federal firearm license dealer, you had to go get a background check. Now, next is Lauren. You here, Lauren?
I'm here.
Lauren, what if Congress had tried a different approach? What if Congress said, we're going to put a federal agent in every county in the United States, and his sole job will be to run background checks? Could Congress do that?
I think that they could have done that.
Why could they do that?
Because the federal government in that case would be enforcing their own law.
Right. So is there any problem putting a federal ATF agent in every single county in the United States? And if anyone wants to run a background check, they just call this guy up. Can they do that?
I think yes.
Okay. But is that what Congress did here?
No, they did not.
What did Congress do here?
But in this case, they were trying to have the state sheriffs enforce this, the background check, the federal background check.
Exactly. So walk me through, what does this look like, right? A person goes to a gun store, he tries to buy a gun, and what happens next?
So the sheriff, I guess, at that point would have to be in the store where the gun is going to be purchased.
Does he have to be in the store at that moment?
Well, it said instantly checking. Oh, that was what the Brady Act was trying to do. I don't know. It seems like that's the case.
Okay. All right. I'll do this one. Thanks, Lauren. So basically what happened, keep in mind, this is before computers, right? We're talking about fax machines here, right? We're talking about like old school stuff. There was no way to instantly check a background. So what happened is, after the sale is made, the dealer, the gun seller, would have to wait 5 days. And during that 5-day span, the CLEO, the chief law enforcement officer, would have to perform the background check. And he must make an effort within 5 days to determine whether the person is legally eligible to have a firearm. And he must search in whatever records are available. Now, curiously, the CLEO was not required to actually take any action. He was allowed to tell the dealer, but he didn't have to. And if the CLEO determines that the person is ineligible, he must provide a written statement. So this put a lot of work on the sheriffs. They had to run background checks. If someone was not eligible, they had to put a written statement out. Now, Colin, you here? No, Colin. Bridget, you here?
Okay.
Bridget, do you think Sheriff Mack had any interest in doing this background check process?
Absolutely.
Oh, I like your answer. Absolutely not. Why not?
It seemed interesting to me that places that specifically were chosen to be the parties in this case that are historically gun-touting communities, so they don't want to infringe on their. And a sheriff is an elected position.
Oh, good. You anticipate our next question. Sheriff Mack and Sheriff Printz were elected officials. How do you think their constituents would respond if they were doing these processes to hold up their gun checks and tell them, no, you can't have a gun? How do you think people would respond to that?
I think in smaller communities like that, they'd be voted out immediately.
So, Bridget raised a very good point. Let's say Sheriff Mack follows this law and says, I'm sorry, you can't buy this gun. Who do you think the people of his county will blame? Sheriff Mack or the federal government?
Sheriff Mack.
Ah. Who actually either was responsible for the denial? The sheriff or the federal government?
The federal government, but technically the person themselves.
Yeah. So how does this affect, what you might call political accountability, right? The people know who's responsible for this regime. The average person on the street who goes to buy a gun and can't. Do you think he'll understand what this federal law even is?
No.
He gets a letter from who?
The sheriff.
Sheriff. Bridget, if I can ask you from our previous case, let's say that New York was stuck with the take title provision and New York builds a waste dump in someone's backyard. Who do you think the people are going to blame? Who will the people blame? The state representatives or Congress?
The state representatives.
Do people even know what the take title law is? Do they even care about that stuff?
No.
No, very good. Thank you, Bridget. It was excellent. One of the issues of the commandeering cases, I forgot to mention earlier, but Bridget helpfully reminded me, is it distorts political accountability. Right? Usually when a local decision's made, you know who to blame. Right? If your taxes in your county go up, you blame your taxi, your county commissioners. Right? If there's flooding locally, you know to blame. If there are potholes in the street, you blame the mayor. Right? You know to blame the person who's local. But if there's suddenly a nuclear waste dump that goes up in your backyard, you don't think to blame Congress. You think to blame your local state representatives. And if suddenly you apply to purchase a handgun and you get a letter from the sheriff saying you can't have this, you don't think to blame the federal government. You think to blame the sheriff. Huh. So you see this, I think Moses and Laney were sort of trying to articulate why this is a bad idea. This is a really, I think a persuasive justification against commandeering, that it distorts who is accountable for bad decisions, right? it forces the states to take blame for things that are not their fault. And the state officials are going to be thrown out of office. You can be damn sure, Bridget, if this sheriff turns away gun purchases, he's not being reelected. There's no way he's getting reelected. By the way, he was the sheriff and also the mortician, or he ran the morgue. So he would lose both of those jobs. Okay. So I think we all can at least see the policy implications why this is a bad idea. I think if we don't agree or not, I don't really care, but we can at least see why this would upset some of the state interests. Bridget, next is Emily. You here, Emily?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Emily. So so far so good. Now let's talk about constitutional law. Why is this law unconstitutional according to Justice Scalia?
Because she discusses a lot of different parts of the Constitution, but kind of the main thing that she said is the Constitution imposed an obligation on state judges, but not the actual.
You're giving me all very good things, right? You're telling me all excellent things, but just at the most basic level. Let me ask a question differently, Emily. Maybe this might help. What was the holding in New York versus United States? What did that case hold?
That you cannot put an obligation on the state legislatures.
Okay, you cannot. The phrase uses commandeer. Okay. Yeah. So okay. So New York held you cannot commandeer state legislatures. Correct. Did New York decide Printz? Is this case already settled by the time you get to Printz?
No.
It's an extension of the doctrine, right?
Right.
Okay, so what then was the holding in Printz?
That they could also not apply to state executive officials.
Just be more precise. You said they and apply. Just use the words we're trying to go today. Who's they?
Congress
Could not what? Blank.
Commandeer.
Yes. Exactly. Perfect. Right. So the holding in Printz is that Congress cannot commandeer state executive branch officials. Thank you, Emily. Right? Congress cannot commandeer state executive branch officials. That's exactly correct. Okay. Congress cannot commandeer legislatures. That's New York. And the holding in Printz is Congress can commandeer legislatures. Now, there's a bit of a difference, right? With the state legislatures, they have to enact statutes, they have to enact regulations, they have to sign bills. That's a lot of work. But executive branch officials don't have to do that much. All they have to do is, run a background check and write a letter. All right. So now, Connor, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, so why can Congress not commandeer state officials, state executive branch officials? What's Scalia's analysis?
Well, it wouldn't be necessary and proper for them to do that. It's the same thing as from the New York versus United States. They can't commandeer the executive branch.
Why? I mean, you're telling me that the holding, which is correct, but why?
Well, it's not a proper way of making that reform more effective.
Why?
They're expanding the federal powers to over-encompass the states.
You're describing what's happening, but why is that not? Why is it not proper? That's the. And this is in no way for you, Connor, but very often students give me the what when I want the why. You're describing facts and evidence, but I want the argument why is it not proper. That's the important.
The states has the power to do those things.
That's true, but why can Congress not do this? What argument does Scalia give? What rationales does he give? Give me at least one of them.
What rationale does he give?
Yeah. Why? You're often I mean, you give me lots of what, which is good, but the why is what I want.
It violates the principle of state sovereignty.
How?
The 5th and the 10th Amendment.
How?
By usurping their rights, or like taking away their rights that they're supposed to have.
How do we know they have these rights?
It's in the 10th Amendment. It's implied in the 10th Amendment.
Okay, we're back to implied. Okay, I didn't mean, Connor. I think we're getting closer. Thank you. I don't like putting people through these uncomfortable positions because Scalia himself doesn't really answer this question. What I'm trying to make you recognize is that there's some work being done under the hood, right? There's some work being done behind a curtain that's not entirely clear. There is an answer here. I think we can find the answer, but it takes a little bit more digging. Catherine, you here?
I'm here.
So, Catherine, how does Scalia know, or what evidence does he cite that this is not a proper law, that this is usurping state authority? What arguments does he present?
He says there's no historical precedent.
Yes.
And so in 200 years, and so that's one reason. Also, dual sovereignty, and that he says that the state judges can be commandeered because of Article.
Okay, we'll get to the state judges in a minute. I want to focus on your first argument. You're exactly right. Scalia makes a historical argument. I think this is what Moses was getting at a few moments ago, right? That the text doesn't get us home, right? It may be implicit in the 10th Amendment, right? We can make these arguments of implied powers, but it's a historical argument. And what Scalia says is that there's no evidence. There's no evidence that the federal government has attempted to order state executive branch officials to do this, to take action. Next is Macy. You here, Macy? Macy? Denver, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
She told me to tell you she had to leave. Okay, thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. Denver, let me ask you this question. Let's assume Scalia is right about the history, right? Let's just assume that Congress has never done this before. So what? Maybe Congress hasn't had the need to do before. Maybe this is a novel problem. In other words, why does history matter? Why is Congress today bound by what Congress didn't do in the past? Why does that history even matter? Who cares what Congress I'm talking about Congress. Who cares what Congress did in the past? They have this problem now. Why should past practice define what's proper?
Is this just my own opinion, or?
I'll see what you say, and I'll let you know.
I mean, there's stare decisis, obviously, for judicial.
Stare decisis for courts, my friend. Why is Congress bound by what their predecessors did not do?
I mean, I guess here you would want to maintain the separation of the branches.
So what? No, this is not between branches, between Congress and the states. So it's actually what's called vertical, federal rather than horizontal.
That you're going to be like usurping the president's executive powers. Congress can just
nothing to do with the president here. Nothing to do with the president. All right. But no. My question is more basic, Denver. Why does it matter that something's unprecedented? Right? Why does it matter that this was never done before? Who cares? Who cares? Why does this matter? Why does past practice matter? No? David, want to take a step? Why does past practice matter?
I suppose maybe just to maintain some consistency.
Oh, I like that. What do you mean? Who's maintaining consistency?
Perhaps the judges and just the legal system in in general.
But we talk about the benefit of consistency for the courts. We talk about stare decisis. But this is not consistency for the courts, it's consistency for Congress. Why is it important for Congress to act consistently with their past actions? What might that do?
Well, if we force them to be consistent with past actions that might have remedied earlier bad actions, then it prevents them from falling back into certain holes.
Well, Dave, I think you're really close. Let's just say you're Montana, you're Arizona, right? You're a state official, and you look at American history and you see that there's a consistent practice,
right? And
then suddenly in 1993, or whatever, they change it. What does that do to people in the states, these state officials? How does that sort of radical change affect how people go about their jobs as their government officials?
Well, yeah, it would really change how they make their decisions going forward. People can rely on consistency.
That's it, reliance. Bingo.
Okay.
Exactly right. Thank you, Dave. Exactly what I was looking for. Reliance. Again, this is not spelled out, I think, with any clarity in the Scalia opinion, but I think it's lurking in the background. The states have come to rely on a consistent practice. And it's considered a bad idea to suddenly abandon a long-standing practice that people have come to rely on. It's actually a very similar argument to stare decisis for courts. Right? People rely on a precedent, and even if that precedent's not right, it's a wrong precedent, you follow it anyway. Well, at least some people say you should. Not everyone agrees with that. But here, Scalia seems to say that history matters. Now, it isn't clear Scalia's history is right. I actually think it probably is. I think there's debate with Scalia and Stevens about history. I think Scalia gets the better of the argument, but even if Scalia is wrong, I think there's still an argument to follow the history in any event. Okay? Now, I want to walk through the Stevens opinion a little bit because I think this is one of the best, how do I describe it, battles, right? Where you have a majority opinion and you have a dissenting opinion that disagree on everything, right? It's not very often. Usually, we agree on some stuff. No, here they flat out disagree on everything. It's actually remarkable how much they disagreed. Also, Justice Stevens was bitter about this case. He was bitter until his dying day. I don't mean that lightly. He wrote books until his last years of life, criticizing Scalia over and over and over again. Primarily this decision, Printz, and the Heller case, which involved the Second Amendment. He never got over those cases. But he kind of recognized that Scalia had a point. So if you go to the class notes for a moment, towards the bottom, I have this text from Article 6. I want to just go over this textual argument quickly. So Article 6 begins with the Supremacy Clause, right? It says the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which will be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay, what does that first part mean? If there's a conflict between a state and federal law, the state law prevails. The federal law prevails. I said it wrong. If there's a conflict between a state law and a federal law, the federal law prevails. But then with this semicolon. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. What does that mean? The state judges are bound by federal law, federal constitutional law, and federal statutory law. What I think this provision recognizes is that the state judges could be commandeered. And indeed they are, all the time. If I'm a state court judge, I have to hear federal cases, right? If I want to sue someone for violating federal law, I could go to federal court, rather than CivPro. But you could also sue someone in state court for violating federal law. That's perfectly permissible. So all the time, judges have to interpret and apply the laws of the federal government. That's just a common attribute. Judges always have to apply foreign law, right? If you have a contract that says we apply Texas law and I sue you in New York, you'd actually have to apply Texas law in a New York court. It's fine. You can do that. Okay. But notice it only says judges in every state. It doesn't say anyone else. Now go to the next paragraph. This is what's called the Oaths Clause, which is a very complicated clause. But it says, all executive and judicial officers of the several states, that is, so a state executive branch official and a state judicial officer, are bound to support the Constitution. Right? If you've ever taken an oath to the Constitution, you understand what that means. But they merely support the Constitution. They're not bound by federal law. In other words, the judges can be commandeered, Scalia says, but the state executive officers cannot. They're only bound by the Constitution. You know, maybe you might think this argument's cheap, but actually it's a textual argument, and I think it's a decent one. It's a lot better than what O'Connor came up with in New York versus United States. Now, why does this matter? Scroll down the document to what I call the Justice Stevens Amendment. Justice Stevens wrote a book where he proposed several amendments to the Constitution. And one of the amendments would have overruled Printz. How would he have overruled Printz? He would have modified the Supremacy Clause. How would he have modified the Supremacy Clause? It would say, the judges and other public officials in every state shall be bound by federal law. Again, according to Stevens, the judges and other public officials shall be bound by federal law. In other words, the judges are bound and the sheriffs can be bound. The sheriffs can be commandeered, right? Justice Stevens, by proposing this book, recognized implicitly the word of the day. Like on Sesame Street, the word of the day is implicit, right? Justice Stevens recognized that the Supremacy Clause implicitly gives a burden to judges, but does not give that burden to state executive branch officials. And for that reason, he would modify the Constitution. All right. Questions on that textual argument? All right. Let's wrap up with necessary and proper, which seems to be the subject of every class we ever take, right? Scalia says what O'Connor only hinted at. He explains that courts must assess separately whether a law is necessary and whether a law is proper. He said that a law is not proper if it violates the principles of state sovereignty. A law is not proper if it violates the principles of state sovereignty. How do you know if a law violates the principles of state sovereignty? Here, I think history has to play some role. If there's some novel, unprecedented exercise of federal power, if it's novel and unprecedented exercise of federal power, it's probably never been done before. And people relied on that past practice. And this novel departure is itself a violation of state sovereignty. So even if the Brady Act is a necessary means to regulate the interstate firearms marketplace, forcing sheriffs to perform background checks is not proper. Again, even if the Brady Act is a necessary means to regulate the interstate firearm market, requiring the sheriffs to run these background checks is not a proper exercise of federal power. And this, what they call usurpation, violates the principles of state sovereignty reflected in the 10th Amendment. Okay? So let's just walk through our chronology, right? We have New York. Excuse me. We have New York, we have Printz, and then we have Obamacare, cited nearly 20 years apart. New York didn't really explain its reasoning. Scalia began to articulate what it means to be necessary and proper, and then the Obamacare decision put some teeth on what is not proper. Right? So in all three cases, New York, Printz, and Obamacare, the federal laws were necessary, but the federal laws were not proper. But think of Gonzalez versus Raich, the medicinal marijuana case. In Gonzalez versus Raich, Scalia said that the ban on local marijuana cultivation was both necessary and proper. See how that happens? He didn't say it explicitly, but it's there if you look closely enough. So again, the Brady Handgun Act was necessary but not proper, according to Scalia. And in Raich, Scalia said that the Controlled Substances Act was both necessary and proper. But in Obamacare, the mandate was necessary but not proper. So you see how these two factors bounce back and forth. It's almost always going to be necessary because McCulloch read that phrase broadly. But the deciding factor of whether the law is valid is whether it's proper. All right. I'll start the minute poll. You can start tapping your answers. Are there any questions before we wrap up? Yes, Lainey, go ahead.
So if Stevens was so mad that he had to come up with his own amendment, isn't he admitting that the majority was right?
That's how I read it. I think he, by publishing that book, he sort of acknowledged Scalia had a point. Yeah, that's how I read it. When I read, I was like, wow, he's actually acknowledging Scalia was kind of right. Stevens went on a tour for years just talking about Scalia. And, it's sort of like, all right, whatever. Scalia didn't really care. Stevens died about a year ago. These sort of conflicts in the court stretch for decades, and people get very bitter over time. Okay. It's not a very good book. That's how I gave you the only good part. I saved you the reading. It's actually very thin. It's more of an essay in a hardcover format. But my friends, we're going to be moving on from necessary and proper and enumerated powers after this class. I don't have a satisfactory answer for you about what is proper. The powers that be still have not told us with any precision what is proper. We just don't know. In class for Wednesday, we're going to start the executive power. If you think Congress's powers are vague, just you wait. The powers of the executive, the powers of the president are even more poorly defined. All right, seeing no hands, I will adjourn class. Thank you very much. I'll be back at around 12:30 for office hours. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.